in Matthew chapter 8. Please open your Bibles. Andros got the right one. Well, actually they had scrolls, so that's a modern thing that you have there. So, we will read a few stories, and when I read them, I thought to myself that in these stories, several examples of faith are being described. And let me ask you, please, what means to have faith? What means to believe? What does it mean? And how does the faith work?
Well, the definition in Hebrews is to have a firm faith.
Yeah, okay.
Firm hope, I mean.
Yeah.
Firm hope.
To be sure in what's invisible in Hebrews, right? And to expect, a fulfillment of the expected, right? Something like that. Okay.
I think it's a show of trust.
A show of trust, yes. So it's a certain attitude to God, to Jesus, right? How can it be seen?
By the deeds.
By the deeds, as we talked about this for the past 2 Sundays, I think. Yeah. So I think that these stories here are for a reason, because Jesus finishes the 7th chapter by saying that the wise man builds on the rock, the foolish man builds on the sand, and who is wise? Who is the wise builder?
Listen and fulfill.
Who listens to the words of Christ and fulfills. So, performs some actions. Actions of faith, because you obviously need faith to fulfill what Jesus says, right? So let's read a few illustrations of people's faith. Matthew 8, 1 through 4. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer a gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." First illustration. A man who had a leprosy. I'm not going to go into details about how bad was leprosy in the first age. You all know about that. People were not allowed to come close to other people. People had to scream that they were unclean when they were walking the streets of some city. And they actually lived outside the city. They couldn't even. But they had to warn people about that. So how do you see this man's faith? What did he do that showed his faith?
He got to Jesus.
Well, first he came to Jesus, yeah. So probably he understood that he would face some challenges approaching Jesus, some resistance from the crowd, maybe, but probably he had heard before that Jesus was healing people like himself, right? So that's why he came.
He helped with him, so he's humbling himself.
He would
With
be humble.
even all these other people around too.
Yeah. So that's an interesting observation actually, because when Jesus healed the man, obviously he healed it in front of these people that were following him, because the large crowd was following him. Well, maybe he took him aside, I don't know. But then he said, "Don't tell anyone about that, but go." Well, yeah, somebody saw obviously, since the apostles wrote this down, right? Okay, but this man, he was really humble with Jesus. And I really liked his phrase that he said. It's not just, "Heal me," but he said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." What does this indicate? this phrase itself, except that he was humble.
He gave God the choice. So he probably was ready to not be killed.
Mhm. Yeah, he was humble enough to actually say, if you're willing to heal me, you can. I mean, he knew he could because he saw the solution of his problems in Jesus. But then when he came, he said, if you're willing. So yeah, he gave God he let God be God, let's say. He let God be sovereign in his decisions. He's not a slave to people to heal them whenever they want to be healed, right?
And he calls him Lord, so we don't know how much this guy knows about Jesus, but he knows enough to recognize that this is a proper relationship between him and himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, he obviously put Jesus higher, yes, than himself. Well, the Lord wasn't necessarily God, Lord God, but obviously the higher ranked person. So, but here, yeah, the point is that faith does not demand. And that's important for us to understand. Faith does not demand things from God. Because faith trusts God's plan and God's will. If Jesus said no, or if Jesus said not now, would it kill this man's faith that Jesus could do these things? Or that he was?
Because he was rich.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't. I hope it wasn't. Well, there are not many stories in the Bible where Jesus says no, right? Almost all the stories we read, Jesus heals, Jesus says yes, 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 gives people. Sometimes Jesus, okay, we'll talk about this later. That's interesting. So, but the real faith is to actually surrender yourself before the will of God and not be affected by God's answer no or not now, because we can receive such answers, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. Okay, so I'm saying this because there are some teachings that say you need to demand things from God. You need to say, you promised, you fulfill. You promised me, now you have to. You have to heal me, you have to make me rich, give me health, and fix everything in my life. And if we don't accept, if we don't receive the answer no from God, then some people say that, oh, you don't have enough faith then. Because real faith is to take what's yours from God. Well, they don't say it in these words, but it's pretty much what they mean. You have to take it by your faith. Take what you want. But these are the false teachings, obviously. As if faith was the power by itself that could do the miracles. Our faith. So basically, we perform miracles through our faith, right? So we use the faith, let's say, as the power. But it's the false teaching. Jesus and none of the apostles taught this like that, right? Because the source of every healing, of every good deed, is God. Not our faith is the source. The source is God. And through our faith, we come to God, we kneel before God, and we humbly ask God to fix our lives. But we're willing to surrender under God's will. But hope for healing. Not like walking as this bad servant said, I knew you were mean and you ripped where you didn't saw, that's why I hid my tongue. No. We need to kind of expect, we come with expectations. But if the rejection kills our faith or makes us angry at God, what does this mean about us, about our faith? Doesn't this look childish a little bit to you? Oh, Max gets really mad when I say no. I say no often. He asks a lot, but I am a good father. I cannot say yes to everything he asks. The bad father would give him everything he wants and just never say no. So Max uses some techniques, tactics. Sometimes he uses blackmail. Okay, if so, then I will not let you play with my toys, or then I will not be friends with you, or I will not talk to you for like some period of time. He gets offended, sometimes he gets hysterical, thinking that maybe his hysteria will provide him what he wants, but it won't. Because I'm a good father. Yeah, I don't negotiate with terrorists. Right? So when we demand something from God, when we say, "Now God," or "I won't talk to you," or "I won't believe in you," or doesn't this look childish? Very much. There are a few points that we all need to understand as grown-up Christians. First is that we are with Jesus just for the relationships with Jesus, not to make our lives on earth easier. So that's not the primary goal of us being with Jesus. Jesus did not promise that our lives will be easy, but we are with Him because of the relationships with Him, because of the Spirit He provides, because of the things that He does inside of us, inside of our hearts, right? Because of the connection. Not to get the perks. But the perks are good when we get them, obviously. Good things, answers, yeah. And then, second thing we need to understand as adults, which is also hard, that the will of God is always good for us, in any case. So we need to surrender under the will of God, knowing that it is good for us, that He doesn't give us some things, or says not now. Because God's primary purpose in our lives is to make us strong Christians, to grow us into Jesus Christ. Right? Okay, let's move on. There's another story. Verse 5 through 13, about the Centurion. I'm thinking, should I mention the Chosen or not? Because in the Chosen, his name is Gaius. You may see this. Okay, so when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" Or actually in the Greek, he doesn't ask him, he says, "I will come and heal you." The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Okay. Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. Okay, What about the faith of the centurion? What's so extraordinary about this? Again, we see as the previous man, he approaches him with humility. Again, he says, Lord, I do not deserve. Oh yeah, but that's later, yeah. He said, Lord, my servant is paralyzed and suffering. And then he said, I don't deserve to have you come up under my roof, right? So again, we see Jesus doesn't owe him anything. He addresses him Lord, though he is a centurion. Just think about that.
Yeah, the contrast between the two of them. Someone who's from one of the lowest statuses in society to someone who's significantly higher up the chain.
The centurion had all the authority to take Jesus, arrest him, force him, do anything. He's not in the position in the society to say Lord and ask anything. He needs to demand from him because he's a Roman centurion. He has the authority, but he understands that his authority in this world doesn't mean anything at this moment. And so he humbly comes to Jesus and asks him, Lord, and says, I'm not worthy for you to enter even my house, right? And then also, he doesn't want to compromise Jesus, obviously, because that's what Jews shouldn't come to Roman houses and eat with Romans, right? It was enough for Jesus to eat with tax collectors and sinners and all kinds of weird people, right? And he doesn't want also for it to look like that Jesus obeyed him, because he explains later, well, I do this to my servants. I say, go, he goes. But Jesus is not one of his servants, though it would look like the centurion came to him and he said, let's go. And in the eyes of the crowd, it would probably look like Jesus just obeyed his orders because he should, as a Jew, right? So he doesn't want to cause Jesus any problems and for him to lose his authority in the eyes of the people also. And this again was the request with the willingness to obey and accept any answer from Jesus. So, well, that's interesting, right? Do you think that Jesus actually answered yes to everyone?
There was show with the Daniel, but it's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
Oh,
In the chosen.
there was-
Not in the Bible, not in the Bible, not in the Bible. Okay. Well, I think first of all, the answer is no, wouldn't make it to the Bible because, well, no. Well, no. No means no. Right? Sometimes Jesus kind of hesitated answering. You remember when this woman came from Syrophoenicia and he was like, no, I was sent first to the Israel's people. It's not good to take the bread from the children and give it to the puppies, doggies. Yeah, he didn't use it in the rude way, just for you to know. He used it in the way of how people compared dogs and the children in the house, right? And then she said, Lord, but even dogs eat the crumbs. And then it seemed like he was like, all right, I feel like, but and that wasn't the only story, right? When Jesus hesitated. Sometimes Jesus tested people's faith. They had to, kind of. So the point is, sometimes God says no just for a time for us to be persistent in what we ask for, right? So He doesn't want us to just give up and say, okay, or He will make it clear that no means no, right? Yeah.
And this doesn't mean He said no, but it's similar that Matthew 13:58, and He did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith.
Yes.
So we don't know if He said no, but He didn't act in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, yeah, the great indicator actually of the faith is C step number 1 of the man with leprosy is to actually come to Jesus and ask him. It's the first and the greatest indicator of the faith. So probably in Capernaum, not many people actually came to him with humble hearts and asked him about something. Because that would show their faith. That would mean that they believed in him. And whoever doesn't ask does not receive. Whoever asks receives, right? So yeah, but the point here was that sometimes Jesus was kind of hesitant, but we know that God had a plan to then answer to these guys, and just was testing their faith, right? Sometimes he said no, like to Paul. 3 times I asked from the Lord to remove the sting from the flesh, and God said, no, it's enough. My grace is sufficient, he said, for you. And how did Paul react to this? He did not become mad at God. Why didn't you remove this thorn from my flesh? Now I cannot live with this thorn. No. It was probably something that was bothering him a lot. And that's why he was asking about it, right? But then Paul said, okay, I will worship God in my weaknesses. That doesn't matter. If God says no, that the grace is sufficient. Because I'm not with God just to feel good, just to feel healthy. I'm with God because I love God. I have the relationships with God. Right? So it doesn't matter if God gives me something or not. That's the mature approach. But what's so special about this centurion? About his faith? There's something really special about his faith. And Jesus said, I have not seen such faith in all the Israel.
He decided that Jesus don't need to go to his house to heal his servant. So his word is enough for that. It's interesting because I'm not sure that he heard about how Jesus could treat somebody with his
telepathically.
word. Yes. So before that, Jesus actually usually gives people that he cured.
Exactly. Yeah, he didn't put God in the box. His faith was out of the box. His faith was that God is almighty. And it doesn't matter if he's there or not there. They have the pattern there. People came to Jesus. Jesus touched them or spit on the ground and did something or did some manipulations and healed people. And people knew, okay, this scheme works. We need to come to Jesus. He will do some manipulations and we will be healed. They saw thousands of examples probably of that. The demons were cast away, the blind when he was touching their eyes, right? So that was the well-working cycle, let's say. The pattern. And everybody knew this, that this was the pattern. Probably he heard about this pattern too. But then the faith of this centurion, it reaches outside of this pattern. He suggested that Jesus, being God himself, that he could do something outside of this box. There was nothing impossible for Jesus. And that was his faith. His faith was bigger than the faith of those people who just came and were in this pattern, in the cycle of healings. Right? So yeah, he broke this pattern. What does this story teach us? To not put God in the box. For sure.
How to approach God.
How to approach God, yeah. You know, it's always easy to follow a comprehensible instruction of how to get God's answer, for example. You should come to the king, you should kneel before the king, you should humbly ask. Or there's this desire, some people have this desire take what worked elsewhere, bring it into our church, and do the same thing and expect the same result. Right? Hey, in Jakarta, they're studying Bible for 6 years with people, and they have a boom of people coming to Lord and being baptized. Let's do this here. Somewhere, right? Or we take somebody's working scheme, let's say. The scheme works there, yes. And we take it and we try to apply it again with the hope that it would work here also. It may. It may. I mean, I'm not saying that it won't. But this is how the business models work, actually. I mean, you see something working, you take it, you use it in your business, and it starts working, right? So there's no place for a greater faith, let's say. There's no place for God revealing something to us here, living here and now, personally, calling us to something bigger, more. But it should be about our faith and God. It should be out of the box. Don't you think so? What are we willing to do about that? What can God do among us? Have you thought about this? About something special that God could do among us? Something unusual, never happened before. As in this case with the Centurion, for example. Never happened, never seen. And it actually doesn't even matter what that is. As long as we all believe that God can do these things. As long as we all are united, believing that Jesus can perform some things that have not been here, never before. Right? And finally, the last point, there's this funny story about Peter's mother-in-law. Yeah. So it's Matthew 8, 14 and 15. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand and the fever left her. And she got up and began to wait. What? To wait on him? Well, actually, she began serving. She began at once like, what? I need to cook something. The real Jewish woman. The guest is in my house, nothing's cooked, come on. The fever is gone. But the funny thing is that no one asked Jesus to do this thing. I mean, he just came, he saw the need, he healed her. Right? So sometimes, Jesus heals and gives us when we don't even ask him. Have you had such things? You didn't even ask, but then God said, oh, there you go. Thank you, God. That means that God sees our problems. God sees what we need, and sometimes he just gives us, because he's generous. Right? So, these three stories have different faith, different people, different circumstances. But what would you say is the main idea of these different stories of faith? What does it tell us? What should we understand about God, let's say?
That we can ask him, and probably he will answer us.
He will always answer, but may not be in your timing and may not be what you expected him to answer. But he will answer because he listens and wants to hear you.
Okay.
But you won't recognize always that he answered.
He is merciful and he takes care of our needs.
He takes care of our needs, he is merciful. But he's merciful and takes care of our needs. What I would say is that you cannot put God in a box. I mean, out of all these stories, we can see that God is sovereign. God is God, and we should understand that. Sometimes he doesn't need us to ask him about anything, to give us something. Sometimes He waits for us to ask to give us something. Sometimes He expects the faith out of the borders, out of the box, for Him to answer. Sometimes He wants us to be persistent, as in these stories when He said no at first, but then said, okay, because of your faith, I will give it to you. Sometimes it's not like she convinced Him. No. Sometimes He wants us to exercise our faith and be persistent in what we ask for. Sometimes He wants us to accept the rejection and surrender under His will, as Paul did. In any case, He wants us to trust Him. And that's the big difference. Not believing that we will receive whatever we ask, but trust Him. Trust God Himself, because He is the source. And He's a sovereign God who cannot be put in a box.